The House Oversight Subcommittee on Corporate Subsidies and State Investments will come to order. Will the clerk please take the attendance?
Chair Cara.
Here.
Representatives Green. Beerline. Here. Wagella. Here. Ohutsky.
Here.
Mr. Chair, you have 4 members present, a quorum.
Representative Beerline moves to approve the minutes of the September 10th meeting without objection. So ordered. Well, happy Constitution Day, everybody. Today is September 17th, so I wanted to recognize this special occasion today before we begin. The proper role of government is to protect our God-given rights. Unfortunately, government has drifted far away from its original intent and now negatively impacts every aspect of our society. Confiscating money from hardworking Americans to line the pockets of the politically connected has become business as usual. The status quo is both disrespectful and injurious to the people's well-being. Fortunately, in recent years, many Michiganders have grown to recognize and reject corporate welfare, arguing in favor of equitable taxation levels. It is my belief that free markets and equal opportunity are the recipe for success. Let's unshackle the taxpayers of Michigan, no longer holding them liable for the profit margins of Lansing's biggest donors, and instead give them a level playing field to innovate, work, and earn an honest living. In hopes of fewer rules, regulations, taxes, fines, and fees, a business-friendly environment, I hope for, and I will continue to fight for, the prosperity earned and deserved by the hardworking people of Michigan. With that, I'm excited for today's discussion on corporate subsidies, and we have a special guest, former State Representative Steve Johnson. He and his staff did a fantastic job talking about corporate handouts and the problems they caused for the state of Michigan when he was here, and looking forward to having you today. Representative Johnson, if you'll come up, looking forward to your testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Good to see some of you again. I'm Steve Johnson, former state rep. I'm now with the Center for Practical Federalism, which on Constitution Day, we're big fans of the 10th Amendment, that some powers are with the federal government, but far more reserved to the states, and more importantly, to the people. But today we're going to talk about corporate welfare and not really federalism. And I'll try to keep it to kind of 3 different buckets. There's a lot of reasons why you could be opposed to corporate subsidies. I'll talk about the morality of them, the fact that they don't work, and then touch on some constitutional issues. For me, I look at it from the morality of it. Corporate subsidies, at its very core, is you're taking some money that isn't yours, it's your neighbor's money, and you're giving it to oftentimes multi-billion-dollar corporations. And I do try to think about our neighbors and think, all right, they work average jobs, they work hard. Like my neighbors they're doing well, I think, but they're not. They don't have excess money. Every dollar matters, and when we look at that and say, well, thanks for your contribution, but we're going to take that money and give it to this multi-billion-dollar company because they hired some good lobbyists and they're making some good arguments about things that they're going to supposedly do in our state that often doesn't come to fruition. I really don't know how you could be more to the saying of stealing from Peter to pay Paul. Like, that's exactly what's happening here. And I don't think in good conscience we can do that. And I would hope that when you consider any of these projects, you think about the fact of this isn't free money. This isn't just some slush fund that you get to decide how to spend. Well, they're dollars that were taken from hardworking Michiganders that would have loved to have those dollars and to spend on their own family, on their own dreams. And we understand the importance of taxes. We have to have law enforcement and court systems and schools. There are things that are actually valuable. But do we really need to take money from average, everyday Michiganders to give to large companies because we think that they're maybe somehow special? I would argue no. I think there's a moral issue there. And furthermore, the picking winners and losers, it's absolutely accurate in this. Why do some companies get in, other companies don't? And I do have to commend the work of this committee, the House. I believe you passed legislation banning lawmakers from doing non-disclosure agreements. And that's great legislation, fully supportive. And when you hear some of the arguments in favor of why those should exist, one of them was, well, we have different, our competitors, we don't want them to see what we're doing. And at first glance, you think, all right, that makes a lot of sense. That is something that you want to keep to yourself. But then if you think about it for 2 seconds, say, oh, yeah, you have a competitor. So we're thinking about giving money to this organization, this business, And we have to keep it quiet because we don't want their competitors to know. The obvious question becomes, why do they get the money and not the competitor? Why have we decided that this company is worthy and this other company isn't worthy? And there could be a number of reasons there. None of them are good, in my opinion. Governments are not good at this. We're not good at deciding which company is worthy and which company isn't. And I don't think that's the America dream. I don't think that's what our country was set on, of deciding, well, we're going to give favors to this company over that company. The American idea is saying everyone gets a chance, everyone can go after it. And if you've got a good idea, if you can make a good product that consumers like, go for it. But government shouldn't be in the business of deciding we like you over someone else. And so that's sort of the moral argument I would make. From a practical standpoint, even if you don't care about the moral argument, they don't work. Mackinac Center has done a number of studies on this. I think they've done great work. I think it was James Hohman at the Mackinac Center had a study called Front Page Failures. And he looked at, I think it was the Detroit Free Press, looking back a number of years at, on the front page, the headlines of all these jobs that are going to come here and due to some sort of incentive program, and looking at it and saying, all right, did they actually come to fruition? And what he found is about 9% of them actually came to fruition. That's 1 in 11. And that's, of that 9%, how many of those jobs would have been created even if you didn't have the subsidy? I believe some of those jobs were Amazon distribution centers. Well, Amazon was probably going to build a distribution center regardless of these subsidies. And I don't think we needed to give Amazon more of our money. So you start to look at it and say, all right, most of these jobs didn't happen. The ones that did happen probably would have happened anyways. It seems like we just spent a whole bunch of money on things we didn't need to spend it on. And I'd want to caution the committee on thinking, well, maybe we've just done it wrong. Maybe there's a better way that we can do it. And that's where I'll give a little historical context here. I feel like I'm the old guy here going back in history through all the different evolutions of corporate welfare. So I was elected in 2016, so my first term was 2017, and we were kind of in the shadow of the mega credits from the Granholm days. And at that point, everyone's sort of kind of in agreement, those didn't work, those were bad. But there's still an appetite of, well, we still want to do these corporate subsidies. These businesses still want it. So what they did is say, well, yes, the mega credits were bad, but we've now come up with this better idea. And to me, as a Republican lawmaker, they say, those are Democrats. They couldn't better it. But we found something better. We've got good jobs for Michigan. This is, Governor Snyder can run this better. The Republican legislature, we've got a better system. And so we go ahead in 2017 and we pass that. And it was actually to try to get Foxconn, which I'll talk on Foxconn in a second here. But that was the big reason. 2017, we had to do that. Completely failed. We didn't get Foxconn. And they said, well, one of the reasons we didn't get it was because Wisconsin offered just more straight cash. So we need to have this fund that can just offer straight cash. Well, then here comes SOAR. And that was my last term in here where we came up with the idea of SOAR. That's how we're going to get these points. You know what? The MEDC, they're not that great at it. We need more legislative oversight. So SOAR provides that, right? It goes through the Appropriations Committee. This is a better way to do it. And now we're kind of seeing the effects of SOAR and saying, yeah, that didn't really work either. And I assure you, after 2028, we'll have a new governor, doesn't matter, Republican or Democrat, whatever the administration is, these same people will start coming to you and say, all right, we now have another way to do it. Yes, mega credits didn't work, and good jobs for Michigan didn't work, and SOAR didn't work, but now we figured it out. But they haven't figured it out, because at the end, what it comes down to is centrally planned governments, thinking that we can centrally plan the economy. And governments just can't do it. We're not equipped for it. The free market is far better. I'll talk about Foxconn. I don't want to talk too much here. I'll open up for questions soon. But Foxconn, you might not even remember this, which is crazy, because in 2017, it was everything. Foxconn is going to come in, and I think it was 13,000 jobs that they were promising. Massive manufacturing. We're bringing manufacturing back. This is going to be huge. We have to get it. We are in a bidding war with other states. We have to do everything it takes to get those jobs. And I sat in the Tax Policy Committee at the time where this legislation came through, and it was just insane the amount of pressure that was coming through. And pretty much I think every lobbyist in town was probably involved one way or the other, because it was such a big project. And there's this demand of, we have to get this. And it was transformational, which, by the way, you'll hear there's two common phrases in the economic development world, transformational. They'll always say, oh, this is transformational. It's transformational. This is going to transform the state. And then, get a couple years past, you realize that's true. And then tool in the toolbox. We need another tool in the toolbox. Oh, we got to have another tool in the toolbox. I've heard it a million times. And yes, it's true. It is another tool in the toolbox, I would say. But I don't want broken tools in my toolbox. And these things are broken. They don't work. So Foxconn, I think Michigan, I was reading an article about it and kind of preparing for this. It looked like our offer was about $3.8 billion. And the numbers you can kind of play with, so who knows the exact number. But they're saying about 3.8, and Wisconsin offered about $3 billion. But they got the deal, and there's different arguments of why. And so Wisconsin was the big winner. And I was reading last night, preparing for this, there's a CBS News article that after Wisconsin had won and Michigan lost, and they're almost doing the autopsy on Michigan. Because we were being told, if we don't get Foxconn, our economy is going to be left in the dust. Which, by the way, no one even talks about Foxconn now, which is important to remember. And so in their autopsy, the first paragraph said that our neighbors to the west had a grand slam win, which is what it felt like at the time. They got this massive, massive manufacturing facility, except it never actually came to fruition. Hundreds of millions of dollars were spent by the local government doing site prep. They went into debt, by the way. The local government, hundreds of millions of dollars into debt to try to bring this facility in. They didn't even come close to the 13,000 jobs. It's a shell of itself right now. They definitely didn't do what they said they're going to do. I think they claim they have maybe 1,000 jobs there, but there's kind of some skepticism there. But really, you have a lot of just empty fields that are sitting there waiting to be developed. And all this money was spent on this, all this effort saying, we have to get this. It's what we have to. If we don't, basically the world's going to end. And now we sit here, 7, 8 years later, and no one even talks about Foxconn because it wasn't the end-all, be-all. The economy is far greater than one company. And so I think that's my other caution to legislators is don't get so wrapped up in thinking the next shiny object you have to go after so hard, right? The latest ones is the electric vehicle battery plant. So we have to have those. We have to. That's the future. We have to have those. Great if you have them. I'm not opposed to them. But let's not take our neighbors' money and give it to these large companies because that's just what we think the next thing's going to be. I assure you in a few years, we'll be onto something new. And instead, if you focus on creating a business environment that's supportive for any type of business, that involves lower energy rates. A lot of these manufacturers, they're looking at, hey, what's our electric bill? What's our natural gas bill going to be? Low, simple tax code, less regulations, a skilled workforce. That type of stuff is far more valuable than can you spend enough money? Can you throw enough money at this problem? And so then the last thing I'll bring up here is sort of the constitutional aspect to it. And I'll read, I think it's Article 4, Section 30. In the Michigan Constitution, it says, the assent of 2/3 of the members elected to and serving in each house of the legislature shall be required for the appropriation of public money or property for local or private purposes. So there's two things when I read that. The first is the Constitution does allow money to go for private purposes. I don't like it, but it is constitutional. It does appear there is a mechanism there that says you can spend it on a private purpose. However, you need 2/3 vote. And I think sometimes in the legislature we haven't been the best at doing that. I'll give you some examples. I just went to last year's budget because the most recent one, well, I know you guys are working on this year's budget, I'm sure. We'll see if this happens. Hopefully it doesn't happen again. But here's a section I read in there. And remember, you need 2/3 vote to do to a local or private purpose. Here's a section. The department shall allocate the funds under this section to an entity located in a township with a population between 1,805 and 1,815. So there's a 10-person gap there, right? In a county with a population between 132,000 and 135,000, according to the most recent federal decennial census. Clearly, there's one specific thing that's getting this, right? But by doing these numbers game, we're trying to find a way to say, well, we didn't say specifically who it had to go to, but you did, right? I don't know which township it is, and the money maybe is well spent. I don't know. But I think there's clearly an issue there saying that we're trying to get around a 2/3 requirement. Just throwing these numbers there doesn't accomplish that, in my opinion. And then I'll read another one that was in last year's budget. And I think we think of corporate welfare, we'll think of the MEDC. It's not just the MEDC. We see it just in the straight budget process. And as you go through the budget, encourage not to have stuff like this in there. And you read this, and I want to think about, would you be happy going to your neighbors and saying, yes, this is what I voted on. We did this. I would think most people would be kind of feeling a little bad about it. It doesn't feel right. This is the line. Not less than $2 million. So not less than $2 million. So this is no small amount of money. Must be awarded to support at least one woman-owned, minority, small business, supports electric vehicles, based in a city with a population of at least 600,000. I mean, think of all the boxes we're checking there, right? I mean, it's got to be, there's clearly one company that's in mind here. Is this really the way that we should be spending the money of the people in Michigan? Or maybe is there a better way? Should those dollars maybe actually be fixing roads, funding education, paying off debt, rather than these kind of games of we're going to give $2 million to this one specific person who maybe is a great person, and I don't know who that person is or the company is. Maybe they're fantastic, but I don't think it's the role of government to provide them $2 million. So that's kind of where I stand here. There's a lot of other arguments I could bring up. The Foxconn thing, I'll touch on one last time. Where it went in Wisconsin, conveniently, was in the same district at then Speaker of the House, Paul Ryan. That's no mistake that I just happened to be there. And I think that speaks to the political process where businesses are being located based off of where certain people in power happen to represent. The House was represented by Democrats last term, Republicans term before that. Michigan tends to go back and forth. We don't want to have an economic policy where businesses are deciding, well, where should we locate based off of who's in power today and who might be in power tomorrow. Businesses should be locating where it makes the most economical sense. And when you start to go down this road of, well, government gets to determine these things, government gets to decide this, you're just opening a rife for abuse. And that's not good economic policy. It's not good for the businesses in Michigan, and it's certainly not good for the people in Michigan. With that, I'll open up any questions. Happy to talk about this.
Thank you for your testimony, Representative Johnson. You are a wealth of information and have been excellent at making the arguments about why free markets are important in our economy. And just thank you again for everything that you've done in your career. And will continue to do, because you're still doing great work. And my first question for you is on transparency. With the mega credits, the MEDC is who oversees and makes sure that the paperwork that they're doing is proper, up to speed, in compliance. And then the Treasury basically just rubber stamps it. And when we in the legislature want to go in and review and see, well, what are those numbers? How big of a handout are they getting from these certificated credits? We're not able to see that information. Do you believe that's appropriate?
Of course not. And I think anyone, you talk to your voters back home, doesn't matter if they're Republican or Democrat. That's why I always like this issue. Because it didn't matter what party people were, they just sort of said, well, that's kind of wrong. Why are they, I know what I have to pay in taxes. It's a very set rate, but then certain companies don't, and they get these special deals, and we don't even know what exactly the deal is and how much money are they getting. And I think that, especially with the mega credits, where we're paying for jobs that don't even, these are historical jobs at this point, and we're still paying for these, it makes no sense. The MEDC is trying to operate as if they're a government agency, but also not a government agency. There have been multiple lawsuits. The Attorney General's office gone after them. Mackinac Center, I think, has some FOIA requests with them that are not being answered. That if it was any other agency in government, they wouldn't have that ability. But MEDC always seems to be sly and always trying to get around these things. I think these are bad deals. I've made that very clear. If you think these are good deals, if you think this is good policy, why are you so afraid to show these? Then why are you not here's the numbers. If I made a deal with someone else's money and I'm getting a great return on it, I'd be proud of that. I'd be showing them. Say, here, we spent $1 billion on this company, and here's all the jobs they created here. But they don't want to do that. And that's where this oversight committee is really important. Do oversight. I don't think you should do corporate welfare to begin with, but do oversight. Go back and don't just do the last year, right? The last year, if we talk about the recent projects, it's a lot of finger pointing, right? Republicans will blame Whitmer, Democrats will blame Trump. There's no value in that. Go back 5 years and see, all right, 10 years, 20 years, I don't care. Doesn't matter who was in charge at the time, and look at what were the press releases that went out saying we're going to create all these jobs, we're doing all this great thing, and look at it and say, all right, what happened? Where did those dollars go? Did those jobs actually come to fruition? Did they not? And what we're kind of seeing with MEDC is they love to tout their success stories. They love to tout when a deal is made, but when the vast majority of these deals don't work out, we don't hear about that, and we moved on. And that's where this committee plays an important role to say, we want to keep talking about those, because we're not going to get better if we continue to just go to the next project and forget about all the failures before us.
Very good. And next question from Minority Vice Chair Wagella.
First off, thanks for being here. I think you nailed it on those three terms: economic development, which I call corporate handouts; transformational is a really interesting word that's always thrown around; and then tool in the toolbox. There are so many different subsidies out there for private business in the state of Michigan. It's kind of unreal. And my point with this is, I always find that this is a very popular issue in my district to talk about. We should stop giving public money to private business, because everyone in where I live knows we need money for roads and water and all these basic things that government can and, in my opinion, should do. But what we've seen under both Republicans and Democrats over the last decades is the continuance of this policy, and there have been some reform attempts. I know you've been party to them. What do you see as the biggest barrier to getting reform legislation, or just simply stop doing this through the legislature and signed? I think it's a task we're trying to figure out. I think today, but I'm just curious, what did you find were some of the biggest barriers?
I mean, I fought this 6 years in the legislature and did lose most of the time, so maybe I'm not the person to tell you. I think one of the, I don't know if I would call it the best argument, but one of the most pervasive arguments that seemed to work with a lot of our colleagues was, well, other states are doing this. And yes, I don't agree with it, I don't like it, but if we want to compete. And so that was like the Foxconn issue. Well, I don't think this is good policy, but if we don't, then the other state's going to get 13,000 jobs. And in hindsight, we can look at that and say, yeah, we actually were, there's lots of articles now saying Michigan dodged a bullet there. But it would always happen well, other states are doing this. And I know when I was I'm always curious what they tell people of the other party, but they're telling oh, well, Texas, that's a good conservative state. They're doing way more than us, and their economy's doing so well. If we want to compete with them, we have to do this. I wonder if they're saying that about a Democrat state, so a Democrat lawmaker, I don't know. What they never say is the states that are doing it, because almost all the states are kind of doing it at some level, they never point to the states that their economies are not doing well and also are doing corporate welfare. It's like, yeah, it's probably not actually the reason for it one way or the other. I know there's been legislation on doing like a state compact to say, hey, let's all knock it off. I think that would be beneficial. That would maybe take one argument off the table that I don't think it's good policy. I think we're better off not doing it. But I get we want to compete with other states, or we're afraid we're going to lose it. So if I had to say the best policy you could do to maybe help get us there is a state compact, maybe at least with the Great Lakes states of saying, all right, Wisconsin, Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, let's stop it. This arms race of who can offer. Think how much money for Foxconn, billions of dollars, crazy amount of money. Let's knock that off. Let's compete based off other factors. I think there's some room there, both Republican and Democrats, to say this might be worth it. And it's happened. I think it was, I always get it mixed up. I think it was Kansas City. There's both sides for the states on that across the river, and they're both kind of competing over getting these different projects and which side of the river do they build it on. And kind of they came to an agreement and said, we're going to stop battling each other for these projects, because all we're doing is taking all of our people's money and trying to see who can get this one top project. That would be my first recommendation, is state compact with other states to say, let's knock it off. And then the second thing is this committee, and in your personal capacity, is oversight. Highlight all this stuff, because they generally fail over and over again. But usually by the time they failed, we moved on to the next subject. And so there's never a reckoning. There's never accountability for that failure. And so keep bringing up those, hey, we gave you a lot of money, or at least we promised you a lot of money. Even if they didn't get the money, that money was sitting there waiting for them that could have been spent on roads. Think how much money is sitting in the SOAR fund. I don't know what's in there right now, but there's a lot there waiting for deals, what deals can happen. Well, that could have been spent by now on something that could have helped the people of Michigan.
You mentioned earlier how whatever party is in power leads the charge in handing out these big corporate subsidies to corporations. And coming 2028, I just feel the trajectory has been in a good direction for our state. People on both sides of the aisle, the people are starting to recognize that this is thousands of dollars that's coming from their families to give billions of dollars to big corporations. And whether you say, hey, that's not free markets like us, or that's all that revenue the state could have had to fund projects in the state of Michigan, either way, there's so much that we're losing out on by giving these billions of dollars. And only 9% of the jobs come to fruition, like the Mackinac Center said. Of 123,000 jobs roughly, we only ended up with 11,000. There's so much more valuable things that we could do with the taxpayers' dollars. Would you agree?
Of course there is. And I'll just say, I don't know what the numbers are currently, but at one point, if you counted the negative hit to the budget from the mega credits, which is through the old Michigan business tax, and then the amount of money we spent on MEDC, it was close to the amount of money we brought in with the Michigan corporate income tax. And so at some point you say, wait a minute, we could just be tax-free for businesses. And I'm not saying that's the route we should take. But you start to say we could almost be revenue neutral in saying no corporate income tax. I think that'd be a lot better of a system than saying we're going to take from some and give to others. And I know it's not a perfect analogy because a lot of small businesses don't pay the CIT, they pay for their personal income tax. But it does sort of paint a picture of the amount of money we're spending is almost equal to the corporate income tax. That feels like there's a much simpler solution. You want to bring a large company here to say, we're not going to have the corporate income tax whatsoever. We'll just have a zero flat rate. That'd be way better than this political process where you got to hire the right lobbyists, you got to convince the right people in power to get these multi-hundred million or billion-dollar subsidies.
Next question from Representative Bierlein.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for being here. You mentioned the issue in the state constitution about giving money to private entities, for-profit entities, and then mentioned that we haven't really policed that ourselves. Why has that not been brought up in court? Why has that been, do you think, allowed to continue to happen budget cycle after budget cycle after budget cycle without really like a challenge to it constitutionally?
Yeah. The first thing I'll say is the Mackinac Center is actually doing a lawsuit on that currently. Why hasn't it happened in the past? I think by and large, both sides had reason to gain. There's never a Republicans are going to sue a Democrat administration or Democrats sue a Republican administration because both sides were benefiting. And I'm sure, so I just did a quick, when I was looking at that budget from last year, I just did Control F census. How many times the word census in there? Because that's, they used to base out the last federal decennial census. It's like 401 times. And sometimes it's used a couple times the same projects. I don't mean that's over 400 projects, but it's substantial. And I'm sure if you look at it, it's not all for one party, right? There's people on both sides that are gaining from it. Who loses? Well, the taxpayer loses, and the taxpayer, most of them aren't aware of this process whatsoever. It takes a group like a Mackinac Center or some other public interest law firm to do that. So I think in the past, it's just sort of been both sides are using it, and it just has kind of worked. There's nothing prohibiting it, right? It's if you have the 2/3 vote. I want to say when Whitmer was governor, because there was bipartisanship, you had to have Republicans with Democrat signature. I want to say a lot of those budgets did have 2/3 votes, so it would have been doable. Obviously, last term, much different political dynamic, and there's politics at play. I'll freely admit that. There wasn't that threshold. I'm trying to think during the Snyder years what that vote would have looked like. They had 2/3 vote. The Republicans did in the Senate at the time, and then in the House, not always a roll call vote, like on immediate effect and stuff like that. So maybe there's some games there. It's hard to. I can't give you a solid reason other than it just hasn't really come up before that I'm aware of. But it is in the courts now. And I'd love to know what the argument on the other side is. Because you read some of these things and say, it's clearly for this one entity, right? There's no other person involved. So it seems like it's a blatant violation of the Constitution.
Do you believe it's appropriate for public servants to sign non-disclosure agreements in their legislative capacity?
No, I don't. I mean, I was here when that all came out. No, it's not. I have sympathy for the people when it first happened. I could have imagined where someone said, "Oh yeah, we want to explain this to you. Can you sign this?" And you, not even thinking twice about it, of just like, "Oh yeah, whatever." And then you're like, "Wait a minute, no, you represent your district. You don't get to make deals without, being able to tell your district what you're doing." Of course not. The more you think about it, of course, that's something that you should never be able to put yourself in a position where you can't tell your constituents what you're doing. I mean, that is what it is. You put yourself in a position where you're saying, I can't tell you. Even if I wanted to, I can't tell you. I'm forbidden. That's a bad road to go down. I mean, think of one business can get you to sign something to say, hey, I can't talk to my constituents about this. How can you represent people knowingly saying, I can't tell them the full truth of something? So, no, and I commend you guys on working to eliminate that. Bipartisan legislation, glad to see it.
Next question from Representative. All right. I guess next question for me would be, what would your thoughts be about abolishing the MEDC?
I mean, I love it. I do. Look, if you want to say, because I talked about that when I came in, and I had someone who said, well, maybe we need an office to take in the phone. Like if you want to have an office that says, hey, we take phone calls if people want to move here and they want to know, hey, how do I get a license and what's the permits I need? And you want to have some central office to sort of help a business out, like here, this is what you need to do to get started. Fine, I'm not going to fight you on that one. But to have an entity that their sole purpose is we take money from one group of people and we hand it to another group of people. And oh, by the way, we get to decide who that group of people is. And we can act like there's no politics involved. We know there's politics involved. We know there's favoritism involved. And that's not what, when you're looking at economic efficiencies, you don't want businesses to be spending resources cozying up to certain state officials. That's not good economics. You want them to focus on making good product for their customer. So no, I would get rid of MEDC, at least the corporate handout part of it. I remember a guy, West Michigan, there's a well-known company in West Michigan that got some grant, and he was a smaller version of what they did. And he said, that was my competitor. You just gave them money. He's like, that's not fair. Like, they already have economies of scale. And this guy was successful. He wasn't asking for a handout, but he's like, don't give my competitor money. And by the way, some of that money came from me. Yeah, that's what the MEDC is doing. I don't think they need to exist. You save a lot of money. I mean, put that towards whatever needs you guys have in the budget right now.
And in that scenario, they might be taking an employee away from that individual too. So they're taking one guy's money and their employees, and then another corporation who's getting a special deal is able to pay a higher salary to that former employee. So by that point, you have somebody who's substantially injured in that circumstance. If you're charging them tax money and then taking their employee.
Especially in a tight labor market. Well, that was good jobs for Michigan. The idea was the mega credits failed, so how can we structure to make sure these jobs are actually created? And so we said the company gets to keep all of that employee's state income, right? So your 4.25% state income tax goes to the company. It's like, all right, it's a good way to sort of make sure that the job got created. But then you start saying, like, wait a minute, the company that's already in existence that doesn't qualify for this, they don't get to keep that. But this other company does. Well, now they're going to be able to hire employees way easier than you. They got a 4.25% advantage on hiring employees versus you, the well-established community business that's been there for years. That's clearly not fair to them because you can steal their talent.
We have economists today who have awful theories, like Paul Krugman, for example, who thinks that digging holes and filling them back up will help to stimulate the economy, and in some way is a good thing because it creates jobs. Well, when you look at that from a broken window fallacy perspective, which of course is Frederick Bastiat's theory, excellent theory. What he explains in that is that if a hoodlum were to break a window, if you just look at it in its short run, well, it creates a job because then you need somebody to come in and replace that window. But what it fails to recognize is the business owner who didn't want to replace that window because it was perfectly fine in the first place and wanted to buy a new suit from the tailor, no longer is able to afford that new suit. So in scenario A, you fix a window that was perfectly fine in the first place and you end up with a window like you already had, or scenario B, you have a perfectly fine window and a suit. And when we get these economic deals and creating jobs and whatever they do produce, everything that goes unseen, all the productivity from taxpayers having more money in their pockets and spending it in their community or making economic decisions elsewhere, going to a baseball game or going out to dinner some evening and helping the small businesses in our community, all is not seen. And so do you feel that these corporate handouts are a good example of the broken window fallacy?
Yeah, I do. And you could say, we would never be so dumb to do something so blatant like that. I would remind you of the Cash for Clunkers program, 15, 20 years ago, where we said, take your car that's running and give it to us, and we're going to destroy it and give you a check so you can go buy another car. Terrible economic decision. Just good for automakers. I'm sure they loved it. Good for a certain segment of our economy. But when you purposely are destroying things that work, that's not good economics. That's about as dumb as you can get long run. And I think corporate welfare is very similar, where we're saying, all right, there's all this money that was being, in resources being directed into just a very few select areas, and you're missing the broader job market. You're missing much bigger thing. I guess I'll think of it this way. When the whole debate happened, someone made a comment testifying, and they said, you get to sit in the shade of a tree that someone planted before you. And that's what this is about. We're creating the economy for the future, whatever. It was a very nice statement. And then I kind of thought about it and said, well, actually, odds are the tree wasn't planted by someone. Statistically, most trees happen naturally, right? Nature. Same thing with the job market. The vast majority of jobs are created through the free market. No government caused the job to be created. But we have this certain select few that we take a lot of credit for, and the government made, and say, well, that's such a small sliver, and the amount of money we spend. I mean, I wish I had the numbers, but at one point, one of these programs, one of these big deals, the amount of money per job was hundreds of thousands, I think. And it's like, well, at some point, just pay the person. This is not good economics whatsoever. We're far better off creating an environment that everyone can succeed in. And I said, energy costs are huge. I mean, that's one of the, you want to help bring manufacturing back, lower energy costs, low taxes. I mean, we can have, I'm sure different parties will have different agreements of, taxes, regulations, how much we invest in education, healthcare. I mean, we can have those disagreements. Those are clearly more important for 95% of the jobs, 99% of the jobs, than these certain select subsidies that go out there. And you have to think about the opportunity cost. And that's really what the broken window fallacy is all about, is what's the opportunity cost? What were we missing there? You're seeing the headline. You're seeing the headline of, oh, this many jobs was created. What you're not seeing is all the money that was wasted in that transaction. And let's say it actually went, let's say our government agency, MEDC, hit it out of the park, and they got the exact amount of money for the program, and it wouldn't have happened without them, and it was perfectly executed. It's still minuscule compared to the broader job market out there. And so you can put all these resources trying to get one thing successful, and you're forgetting all the other small businesses that are far more important. Do something for them. Create a broad infrastructure that every business can succeed.
Very good. Next question from Minority Vice Chair Wagella.
So something I hope our committee looks into, and I'm curious your thoughts on, is last session we essentially doubled and changed the transformational Brownsfield tax credit. I don't know if you followed this last year, but the change that was made essentially changes the entire theory of transformational Brownsfield. So, my belief before is you're usually taking industrial sites or sites that need to be cleaned up. What we did last year was, I think we essentially allowed it to apply to green spaces as long as they build one singular unit of housing. And I'm curious what you think of that, if you followed that, or how dangerous not only doubling that program is, but then essentially allowing it to be used across the state for the very minimal housing projects.
Yeah, I think when it comes to brownfield projects, you can be very sympathetic, right? Because they'll show the picture of the very blighted property and say, well, what's the alternative? Like, how do we get this fixed. We want this blighted property to come down. What my experience with brownfield legislation is, it's just sort of a sneaky way for people who wanted to maybe develop something to get a better deal on it. And so they can use the blighted property as sort of the carrot in front of you to say, hey, we'll get rid of this if you give us all this money. They're probably going to do it anyways, or they're going to go somewhere else. And then you see the definition of blighted property isn't always what we would think of as blighted property. And I remember we had one piece of legislation at one point. It was in Lansing. It was right around here. It's like, I'm going to look at it. And it was just an open field. And they were going, well, there's something wrong with it. And it's like, it looks pretty fine to me. There's no blight. I mean, it looks like it'd be a park if you wanted to be. Maybe you can't dig up the soil. Maybe there's something there, but there's nothing blighted about it. Like, no one living around there is thinking like that's an ugly piece of property. But yet we did this special carve-out for them to treat it like a brownfield. I'm skeptical of a lot of the brownfield, but let's say overall it does make sense. You've got to be very tight with how you're defining the brownfield, I guess, because it has grown to mean a lot of things that average people wouldn't necessarily consider a brownfield.
You and I would agree that if somebody gets rich off a fair and honest trade, more power to them. But if somebody is getting rich off of corporate handouts to their company and then it's causing a wage disparity, do you think that's something that's happening? And is that something that you would say, hey, there's a complete difference between somebody getting rich off a fair and honest trade and then in this situation where they got the special deal, they got the corporate handout, and now they're getting rich? Are those two different things?
Of course, they're two different things. I do sort of contend most of these people aren't actually that successful. I think if your business model is based off of getting subsidies from the government, your long run, you're just not that successful. So your very rich people generally have come up with a product that people want. They're basing it off of, all right, what do I do to please the consumer? When your business model switches to what can I do to please the government, you might have some short-term wins, but I don't think long-term it actually works out. And we've seen this with the automakers, right? Biden gets elected, and there's this huge shift to electric batteries. We're going all this way. All right, Trump said, well, maybe we're not going to do that. We're going back to internal combustion engine. And it's this kind of back, what did the customer want? If the customer wants electric, give that to the customer. If he wants gas, give that to the customer, and you'll be far more successful. This going back and forth, it's not good for the businesses. I get why they do it. I mean, they're on a short-term, trajectory. They always got to try to make a buck and show their investors that they're gaining, and so they see opportunities. I don't blame a lot of these companies to say, hey, if the state's going to hand out $1 billion, like, why would we not go after it? Yeah, I mean, I see the temptation. I'm not going to blame them. I would say, state, stop doing that. And then the market will say, they'll recognize the government's not going to give us money. Let's go please the consumer. That's where the money is. Your wildly successful companies out there, that's what they've done. They haven't made it because they gave money to certain select politicians who then gave them certain deals. You just don't see that by and large. So, and I'm sure there are some of these people that they're doing okay for themselves. We've seen some of the headlines, but by and large, it doesn't work in the long run.
In talking with some of the people in the Lansing Lobby Corps, the lobbyists here, they will say there are things beyond the corporate handouts that matter to them. Of course, they still advocate for them, but I'm just thinking about an atmosphere where they have reliable energy, good roads, workforce that's ready, lower taxes across the board for everybody. If we had an environment like that in Michigan, do you think that would attract people to move back here to Michigan?
Once again, obviously, that's true. I know some on the other side of the aisle, right to work, you're not a fan of it, but right to work has shown to be good for economies. It does bring in people. Yes, energy costs, good education, good roads. There's a whole host of things that if you look at, and I don't know if it was Mackinac Center or if it was one of the other groups, they looked at sort of like a top 10, like when a company's looking to do, a site expansion, what are like the top 10 things we're looking for? Corporate subsidies is way down the list. There's all these other things, and some of them are Republican priorities and some of them are Democrat priorities. And we can have the debate of which one we want to go after. Vast majority isn't the corporate subsidies. Now, if they're available, they're going to say they're important, they're going to go after them. But there's so many things you can do before you have to go and do that. And don't get an arms race to try to get one company to build one facility in your state. It's foolish. And when you look back 5-10 years, you'll say that was real. I mean, the Foxconn example is perfect. If you were living here at the time, if you were part of this process, you would have thought our state is never going to recover when they announced it in Wisconsin. It was like, oh, we lost. It's over. I mean, that's how they try to make you feel. No one even talks about this company anymore. And I don't mean to rag on them or anything, but it just shows you your state is far. Well, let me put it the opposite way. It's transformational. If your state is transformed by one company coming in, that's dangerous. Your whole economy is based off of the success or failure of one company. Well, that's dangerous. Like, why would we do that to ourselves? We want our success to be based off a whole number of companies. So if one company fails, that's okay. We got a bunch of other ones. When you say, well, it's transformational, I don't want my state to be that dependent on the success of a handful of companies. And the good news is we're not. Wisconsin did not fall apart because the Foxconn plant fell through. Michigan did not fall apart because we didn't get the deal. There's a lot of bad money spent in the process, but the economies didn't fall apart because of that.
Next question from Minority Vice Chair Wagella.
I appreciate being here, and I think it's a great discussion. I think what we just saw in the news recently is the announcement that we're giving a $1.5 million grant, which I understand is not nearly as much as some of the other deals, but this time to a German military contractor, right? So I think it's important to talk about how giving public funds to private business is, I think, morally wrong. I would argue that it is even worse to give our public tax dollars to weapons manufacturers. I'm curious if you hold the same position or on that as well.
I haven't heard about the deal. I mean, is it a weapons manufacturer for Germany, or they would create products?
I think it's going to be their American version of it. Yeah.
I mean, I'm probably not as opposed to the company as you are, but I think that speaks to an important point. Why should you, if you're opposed to it, why should you have to support them in your tax dollars? That's kind of what I come back to. It's like, yeah, I might be fine with the company. You might not be fine. That's fine. That's the marketplace. What I don't want to ever be the case is that you have to support a business that you're, say, morally against. I mean, I have this. It's a whole other issue, and I have this with Planned Parenthood. It's like, well, why would my taxpayer dollars have to support an organization that I am very much opposed to? Same way with this. I was actually looking through, I wasn't going to mention this, but I will. One of the companies that received, I don't know if they actually did get the grant, but they were in the application, was Alticor, Amway. Owned by DeVos's. I know a lot of people on the left aren't fans of them. I wouldn't blame you saying, why is my money supporting them? Why am I doing a grant for them? I agree. I don't think my money should go to them either. And you certainly don't want to get it into a point where we start saying, well, now you have to be a politically favored business to get money, because that's also bad too. And so we avoid all these scenarios if we just say, we're not going to do this whatsoever. Elon Musk, I think, is a perfect example of this. He was sort of the darling on the left at one point, right? Environmentalist hero. He's going to get rid of gas cars. He's going electric. People on the right weren't necessarily a fan. So maybe Democrats want to, hey, we'll support his business. Well, then, he kind of changes, and now people on the right like him, and the left doesn't. Well, now people are like, well, we don't want to support his business. I come back and say, none of us should be getting subsidies too. Like that's the answer to this. We don't want a situation where all of a sudden businesses have to try to figure out, all right, how do I please who's in power today? And then if the people you support aren't in power, now all of a sudden your money is paying for businesses you disagree with. I've got a big issue with that. So no, you should not be required to fund a defense contractor. I shouldn't be required to fund a environmentalist battery plant that I don't think is necessary. If the marketplace deems it worthy, all right, we'll have those discussions. But no one should be forced with their taxpayer dollars to fund that. Your taxes can pay for roads. They can pay for judges and jails. I mean, things that government legitimately does. You shouldn't have to pay for businesses.
What final words would you have for us in the legislature in terms of how to handle corporate handouts moving forward?
I mean, you guys have done a lot of good work on this issue. I'd compared to where the legislature has been the last decade, it does seem that there is a shift, and so that's good. I always look at the big picture. Don't get drawn in by the latest shiny object. There will be a new one. I don't know what it'll be. No one does. It will be coming down the road. I mean, Representative Wegel, I mean, I commend your courage where they were trying to hold, well, it was like the debt of your community hostage to try to get you to vote for it. I mean, it's just crazy. Have the courage to say, no, this isn't right for my district. This isn't right for the people. This is not the right thing to do. There's a lot of other things we can do. If we truly care about business, which I do care about business, there's a lot of things you can do. Writing them a blank check is not the solution. Another state is always going to be willing to write a bigger check. And if that's not the case, if you're willing to write the biggest check, I don't think that actually reflects well on you either. Don't get into those games. It's counterproductive. They don't work. It's not good to the people of Michigan. It's not good to your neighbors. Their taxpayer dollars should be treated with utmost respect. And I think that's what I come back to is whenever you start to think about these decisions, think about not the wealthy in your, I mean, I'm not that the wealthy should be ignored, but think about the average person in your district that you just knocked on your door, just average, plain Joe people, and say, all right, they're working probably 40 hours a week. They work hard. They got enough money to get by, but they're not living lavishly. And saying, we take 4.25% of their income, 6% when they buy things. We take money when they buy beer and when they buy gas. We're taking money from them all the time. Let's treat that with respect. That should be in the forefront of your mind every time and say, all right, this isn't my money. This is theirs. Do I really need to give it to a German defense contractor? Yeah, probably not. So that's what I'd leave you with.
Very good. Well, thank you for coming in today, Representative Johnson. I appreciate your insight and perspectives, and it's an honor to have you here today.
Thank you.
Representative Bierlein moves to excuse absent members. There being no objection, the motion prevails by unanimous consent. And there being no further business before the committee will stand adjourned.